be there with you. I mean, I always feel very fortunate when people, invite me into their process. And so if I'm going to be there, I'm going to try and make you feel good about me being there. My company is Ronin, and it's the Japanese word for a samurai without a mask. And it's the concept that I used to work with nonprofits, and I started off as a youth worker way back, when Vancouver still had a Canucks team with Trevor Linden on it, and we did pretty well. Pat Albury was there. And I just couldn't do that anymore because I found that quite often the policies or directives or what they would consider the practices that limit liability really just kind of handcuffed us. And so in order to be able to move forward and be of assistance to people, I had to do that freely. And as such, I'm now wrote in. And one of that things is that when a samurai's master died, he was supposed to kill himself or retire or whatever. He wasn't allowed to be a samurai anymore. But it struck me that, you had these principles that you lived with your whole life. There was actually 8 pieces to the Bushido Code: righteousness, courage, benevolence, respect, sincerity, honor, loyalty, and self-control. And that's ideally what we're bringing to the table when it comes to mediation. And that's how I practice. So that's why because the second part is that looks a hell of a lot more professional than Uncle Jer. And it's a much better business card. But that's why Ronin. So what we're doing here today is we're doing a workshop that I've done. It's actually a very abbreviated version of a 2-day workshop that I've developed and has recently been signed off by Mediate BC as able to get CPD hours. So yay. But it's on how to work more effectively and be more engaged with high risk and hard to serve populations. And it's I don't think it's rocket science, but it's not what we learn. I think a lot of times what we learn are things like how to manage conflict and how to look at negotiating and all this stuff. And I get that, but in the end, essentially, a conflict is 2 people that can't come together on something. And it's either violent or not, it's either challenging or not, and it's either pleasant or not. And so it's, depending on who you're working with, you can either make that better or worse. So that's why I'm doing this. So before we get started, I just want to make sure that I'm taking care of you, right? Now, this is a very short thing. I'll get to my stuff in a second. But this is what I do. So I want to make sure that everybody's okay. Do you guys need anything? We've been here for a while. You got drinks, muffins. Does everybody know where the washroom is? Right? If you need to go to the washroom, it's over there, and it's really nice. But they have those mechanical kind of sink things. So if you're looking for taps like I did, yeah, you're not going to find it.
Well, and Jereme, maybe we should point out at this point that also you should go before 5:30, or I will have to let you through the doors because you will be locked out.
That's a very good point. See, this is why we do the housekeeping stuff. So playground rules, I do a very open participatory discussion, and I am all about you guys having your input. I want to have a discussion. I like the dialogue. But I'm told by Sharon that if you're going to ask a question, she wants you to come up here and hang out with me, which I'm totally good with because, I like people. Is there anything that I need to do to make you feel more comfortable today? Is there anybody that doesn't want me to talk to them? Is there anybody that doesn't want to be engaged with this? I'm totally good with that, by the way, right? But if I need to do anything to make you feel more comfortable, please let me know. If there are any time considerations, I know we're going a little late, so if anybody's got parking stuff, there are breaks in this where we'll be asking questions and stuff, and so if you need to take a break, there are breaks built in, but we're probably going to get going and keep going through here. And then there's the obligatory bad joke, because I think that, when we incorporate humor into stuff, life is good. So this is a joke told to me by my very best friend, and he is a horrible person, but I love him dearly, and it is the mushroom joke. And so anytime he hears somebody say the word mushroom, and it doesn't matter who, it doesn't matter where, it doesn't matter what context, he says, hey, I got a mushroom joke. So can you say mushroom?
Mushroom.
Hey, I got a mushroom joke. So mushroom walks into a bar, walks up to a woman and says, hey, you look pretty, let me buy you a drink. She says, back off, creep. He says, what? I'm a fun guy. That is the obligatory bad joke. And now that we have that, we can move forward. So, let's see. Where are we going? So a little bit about me. I told you about Ronan. That is a Aborigines, I believe Aborigines, might be Maori, drawing of a platypus. And I put that up there because really, I mean, for me, that's the only kind of visual depiction that I can think of that makes sense for me. Because I'm not one thing, you know. I mean, platypuses don't really make sense. I mean, you look at them, they're a mammal, they lay eggs. You know, they got a duck bill and a beaver tail and fangs, and I mean, really, dude, seriously. You know, they're wacky looking, you know, and as much as I am not wacky looking, I know, you were going to say it, but I beat you to it. I have a multitude of views. I'm not one thing. And I don't really come from one thing either. I mean, I really have kind of Forrest Gumped and backdoored my way through my entire existence. I come from a little blue collar neighborhood in Kamloops, and I am the whitest Indian in my family. And I mean we're First Nations, so but I was raised Indian, and I am seriously the first company I ever had was White Sheep. And it's because it's hard to be the black sheep of your family when everybody else is darker than you. You know, I walk around my reserve with my status card on my head so that people know that I belong there. And seriously, you can laugh along because that's some funny stuff and it's not meant to make anybody uncomfortable. This is where I come from, right? I work in an industry that my family has no concept of. You know, we were blue collar. You know, I remember the first time I started taking care of kids, because I'm a youth worker by trade. And I got invited into this one home to do some observation and work with the family. And I sat down for coffee with my brother because they flew me in. And I sat with him. He says, so this family flew you here. And they're paying you. You're what? You know, like, I'll sit with them for $50 and tell them what's wrong. This is my family. This is what we do. My mom doesn't really know what it is that we do. You know, this wasn't her vein. I mean, we steered clear of government systems and police and social workers. And I mean, my mom was a single Aboriginal woman with 2 kids in Kamloops in the early 70s. And so you didn't talk to cops and you didn't talk to social workers, but you really didn't talk to social workers because we would got taken, you know, just plain and simple. You know, it was that way, you know. So for me to be working, doing primarily child protection mediation with social workers these days, that's a foreign concept. My cousins don't know what to do with me, you know. And so I guess the one thing that I want to tell you is that it is such a luxury to be able to sit in rooms like this in this area because at 14 I was a street kid on Granville. And my path to get here was just not normal. And it was really kind of odd. And I don't know how to describe it, but when we go through the high risk groups, I've been associated to several of those, and to be here now is a statistical anomaly, and I recognize that, and I don't take it for granted. But this isn't about me, and I guess the last things that I want to say is, first of all, I'm not an expert. I actually kind of disavow the notion of experts. I think people know stuff, and I think that there are people that are knowledgeable, and I just get really, really concerned when I hear somebody pronounce themselves an expert. Because I've met some experts, and I met some experts when I was in the life. And I can tell you that it is hard to have a real understanding of the trials and tribulations of the hardest served populations from the seat of a BMW. that was also a really long time for me. So I have an understanding of it because I've been there, but I am not part of these groups anymore. And so the current situation, I have a better than passing knowledge, but I mean, really, the street changes every 5 years, and communities change, and climates change, and as political ideologies shift and policies shift and all these things, the climate and culture for these high-risk populations change. So, like, if this was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, what we would be talking about in terms of the Aboriginal question, much different than it is now. If we were talking about status of women in the 70s, it would be much different than the conversation we're having now. By the way, happy International Women's Day. There are so many things that change through time, and I'm glad that they do. I've included some groups that really I don't think are as high risk anymore as they used to be. But one of the things that I want to say to you is that, you know, I say to people in mediation, particularly child protection all the time, when we know there's a problem, and government's famous for this, we put in a solution, we put in a program, a system, and then we fix the problem. And in the best of our wisdom, then we remove the program. All the stuff comes back. So I think we still talk about some of these groups because we need to remember that it wasn't always this way, and lest we forget, you know. So that's me, and that's I'm a philosophy guy. I have, you know, I have things that I believe, and they drive me. I believe far more in guiding principles than I do in firm, fast rules. And really what I care about is getting the job done. And when I'm in a mediation, my job is to get you a conversation. And that's it. And I really don't care about the outcome. I care about the process. I care about your comfort. I care about your ability to engage. And whatever I have to do that is what I'm going to do. You know, I don't get a free set of steak knives if people come to an agreement. You know. And I'd like it because steak knives are awesome, but I don't get a free set of steak knives. All right, so we're running a bit late, but I'm going to tell you what I normally do with people, and that's that I ask them who they are, and I want to get to know you, and I do that purposefully after I tell you about me. It makes it less daunting. It's not that one person's naked and the other person isn't. I'm jumping in the pool before you do. I'm making sure that you know me before I get to know you. And in doing that, we take away some of that edge. And that's okay. So I'm going to ask, first 3 people that raise their hands, I want to know about you. So 3 people raise their hands are going to point at you. All right. I've already jumped in the pool. Come on, 3 people. Who are you? There. Wendy first, then you, and then you.
Okay. I'm Wendy Lacusta. I'm a mediator and a trainer. I do child protection mediation, small claims, workplace discrimination, mainly. And I'm here because I'm interested in what Jereme has to say. We've done a lot of work together over the years. And what do I want to get from this? Don't need the CPD hours, so just the joy of being here.
Fair enough. Love that. Okay, so gentleman in the suit.
Are you sure you don't want anybody else?
I'm totally sure they want you.
My name's Keegan Peppersmith. I'm a third-year law student at UBC. I've done some core negotiations in the past in my second year. I'm here because I'm working at the Indigenous Community Legal Clinic downtown Eastside, and we work with high-risk individuals and populations, and so it's a great skill to have to be able to work with them.
Great. Thank you.
My name's Kalila. I'm a second-year UBC law student. I'm also working at the Indigenous Community Legal Clinic, and we were invited to attend your talk, probably because we do work with a lot of people who are hard to reach, and then when you reach them, it's just hard to know what to say.
Yeah.
And so I think I can benefit a lot from being here.
Perfect. Well, I'm glad to have you guys here.
Make them sit up there with you next time, though, because
All right.
our online audience probably heard nothing.
So for the online audience, we got Wendy Lacusta, Keegan, and Kalila. It's a key. And they're very nice people. They work with the Indigenous types, and we're glad they're here. So I hang out. That's what I do. So, where are we going? So why I wanted to do this. I really believe in mediation. I had no idea about mediation before I really started doing this. I had no idea. But I've seen it, and I've been part of it. And I believe that, it has the opportunity to really help people. What did I put there? It helps people get to better. Wherever, if that's our job is to get them from where they are to somewhere better, mediation helps them get there. And whether it's in a civil dispute, a family dispute, even in a corporate dispute. I don't think people have to rip and tear at each other, to get to a better place. And I think by getting to a better place, we remove some of those bad things in the world. I need to put my thing here because I can't see when it's like that. Excuse me. I think that mediation as a vehicle really allows people to articulate probably better than they do when they're just in a regular conflict situation. And I think particularly if families in this way, or in any relationship where there's been this kind of building conflict, and there's history, and there's so much subtext and so much context that even just to eke the words out in a regular conversation is tough. So when we get into the room, it's that neutral, artificial environment, and sometimes that's liberating, and that brings out the voice. I think when we do our jobs right, we level the playing field. I mean that, and I think that when that happens, we are able to help people engage in such a way that they're just not able to engage on their own. We are able to help people be creative. We're able to help build bridges. We're able to help mend fences. And we can do that because we're outside of the typical constraints of conversation that typically relate to conflict. And I love that. And I also wanted to do this because I know that we can screw it up. And I have seen situations and been in situations where people with the very best of intentions will reinforce the power imbalance. I have seen situations where people, for the very best of purposes, will shut somebody up. And then what the hell are we there for? And I don't get that. And I don't want to be that guy, and I don't think anybody wants to be that person. But I think that when we're not careful, that's what we do. And it's not out of a malicious intent. It's because we don't know the triggers. And I'm guilty of it myself. I said a reference in a mediation one time, because I try and use stories that everybody knows, and some of them, when we talk about supports, I use the Moses tale. Because the Moses tale is a great tale. Moses was the only one who could hold the staff, but they could hold his arms up, and that's how I bring the picture of drawn arms. I had no idea that she was abused in a church setting. I had no idea. It never came up. And as a result of that, she shut down. And it took me a long time to get out of that. And I was very well intended. But when we're not watching, when we're not looking, and even when we are, this stuff happens, and we got to be able to read and react. This is about responding. So, why I think this is necessary, something totally different. Mediation and mediators aren't one size fits all. So one of the things that I want to talk about today is that it's okay. We do what we do, and we do it for who it works for. And I think there are a bunch of general practitioners. I know that some of my colleagues are really good. They can walk into situations and it's that 70% of population kind of stuff, because I think that 70% of the population is pretty average. You've got 15% on the top end that are exceptionally healthy, with 5% being like super kale eating healthy. And then you've got 15% on the bottom that are just really unhealthy, and 5% that are going to die pretty quick, right? 70% is kind of what we go with, and that's kind of how school's structured. Teachers learn to teach to the middle, people learn to work to the middle because that's where your business is. And I think that as general practitioners in mediation and conflict resolution, it's easy to go there. It's safe to go there. It's nice to go there. And it's seriously, man, I love love fests. You know, sitting in a room with people who already know what they want, they can talk to each other, and it's all good. Psh, that's an easy day. I bring muffins, I write an agreement, we're out. Boom, done. But again, there's the 15%. And you never know when that 15% is going to show up, and you never know what they look like. And we have to be okay with our limitations. We have to be okay with their limitations. The next is that, you know, most of the time, like I was looking at the training syllabus from some of the mediation stuff, and we don't learn this. You know, we learn negotiation, we learn conflict resolution, we learn styles, tips, whatever. But, you know, they taught me how to write an agreement. They didn't teach me how to reach people. And this is a skill. This is a skill we can develop. This is a skill we can practice. And that's why I believe this is important, because if we practice in here, we don't practice on clients that can get really hurt. You know, and actually, Wendy is famous for saying, mediation is do no harm. You know, and I love that. You know, I am an arrogant person. But one of the things that I've learned over time is that, you know, confidence in your skills isn't necessarily as important as the recognition of our experiential limitations, and pride is our enemy. If I'm making burgers, you will see me nail that. If it's a tactile thing, you will see me work it until I get it. And I don't think that there's nothing that I can't do if I just try. My mama told me that, and I believe that. But when it comes to people, I can't do that. I need to know what I don't know. And when I've exceeded those limitations, when I'm not understanding that I'm in over my head, somebody else is going to pay the price for that. And so I need to be able to know how to work with that. One of the things that I think is that sometimes our professional identities get in the way. You know? We get stuck in this routine of, well, I'm a mediator, or I'm a lawyer, I'm a social worker, well, yeah, but one of the things that I tell people in child protection mediation all the time is that parents and social workers have the same job. You know, you take away the paycheck and, you know, union dues and all that kind of stuff, and they have the same responsibility, which is to make sure that children are raised to their best level of health and wellness, that they have every opportunity. So in the end, it's about people. It's not about what you do. What you do got you to the table, but who you are gets you there. Like, it really gets you to that point of discussion in such a way that your title never will. And then finally, when we learn more about the people that we're going to be working with that aren't like us, we avoid quicksand. Does anybody know what I'm talking about when I say quicksand? Quicksand is that experience that you get where you step into something that you didn't know was there, and all of a sudden you're sinking. And you struggle because you're panicking. And the more that you reach out and the more that you flail, because that's normal, that's what people do, the worse it gets. And we need to learn how to respond instead of just react. We need to be able to recognize when it's going. And I got to tell you, like, I'm going to manage some expectations today. You're not going to get a full experience of that today. But hopefully we'll look at some groups that at least you'll know if you're working with these groups, you got to be looking for some stuff. Because if they're at risk, it doesn't mean they're messed up. But it does mean that there's some potential. And if you're looking for the potential harm, then if it pops up, then you can deal with it, right? So, again, what I hope to give you a really cursory understanding of high-risk populations. You know, and there is a big list that I got. It's not the whole list, because every day there's a new group coming up. Hard to serve is a little more what I can explain to you today, because that is a little more tangible. That doesn't slide around. Hard to serve looks the same everywhere, right? I want to give you some strategies to position yourself, and we'll find that we can globalize them. You know, if it works for one group, it'll work for the next group because they face the same issues. If we're dealing with the same issues, like if we're dealing with a group that has traditionally not been given a voice, we know that we need to make sure we give them a voice. If we know that a group has been tokenized, you know, in their involvement, we know not to do that, and we can globalize that to other groups. That we can do. And then I want to tell you what I think is really the one thing that you need. And we'll get to that, but all of you have it. So I want to be able to reinforce that with you. And we'll get there. So, before we get there, I want to tell you what I know about people, because there are some truths in life, and I believe there are 3 of them that are particularly relatable to the work that we do. And the first is that people will do what they need to do in order to meet their needs. Period. I think push comes to shove. Rent's got to get paid. I got to get this assignment in. Whatever it is, people will do what they need to do to get their needs met. And they won't always necessarily do the same thing to get their wants met, but they will do what they need to do to get their needs met. People generally do what works for them. They're not complex. If it worked in this situation, they will globalize it to this situation and generalize their approach throughout. People do what works for them. And so if you can recognize what they're doing, you can help them not do it. And you can do that by meeting their needs and helping them to meet their needs in a healthy way so they don't have to meet it in an unhealthy way if that's what they're doing. And then finally, if people don't have options provided for them, they create their own. This is where we start talking about some of the really unhealthy things in the black market economies, in the stuff that's in secrets and shadows, right? If people don't have options, they make their own. And so one of the things that we need to do in conflict resolution situations is be able to be creative and help the parties at the table find a way where they can meet things healthily so that they don't have to meet them in an unhealthy way. Okay? Are we good? Mm-hmm. Okay. So.
Okay. I'm following them. Just so other people aren't quite so put off by the fact that I am constantly playing with my phone. Jereme already knows I'm monitoring for incoming emails, but I realized I didn't actually say that to everybody else. I'm not actually being a jerk here. And we were getting a couple of emails, but not ones that I need to read out. Apparently, I'm causing problems with the mic and sitting too close to it and breathing on it.
Fair enough.
So my apologies.
No worries. All right, so before we move into what constitutes a high-risk population, does anybody have questions this far? Cool. So one of the things that you'll find is that if you look at actually trying to find out what a high-risk population is, it's kind of messy because everybody's got their own definition, and it's based on the context of what people are looking at. So we know that lung cancer, if you're a minor, if you're around asbestos, if you're a smoker, we know that you were in high-risk categories, right? And for every potential thing that you can be at risk for, you're either at more risk or less risk. But when we talk about some of the people that we're dealing with, and in a variety of areas, and it really is, it is irrespective of their socioeconomic status or position in life or business that they do. You will bump into these things. And when I talk about high risk, I mean high risk in 2 ways. So first of all, high risk in terms of the activities or lifestyle that they have, in terms of harm to them, and thus their ability to follow through on anything or get themselves into more trouble. And second, high risk for just derailing any of your discussions. Because people that are generally in high risk, they can blow up a bus pretty quick. So it's, essentially there are a few things. So this is what people can agree on. A person is generally to be considered a member of a high-risk group if, A, they have a majority of the various screening criteria associated with a particular group, or they self-identify as being part of a particular group, and by virtue of their inclusion in this group, they are more likely to be exposed to, affected by, or experience an unhealthy, unwanted, or otherwise negative situation or occurrence. And this is just it. If everybody remember that kid who got kicked out of the First Nations basketball tournament a couple weeks ago? That kid is he's Haitian, but he's from there. He doesn't know anything else. And the fact that he is not First Nations like I am doesn't mean that he's not Isaac. You know, I believe that's where he's from. So he self-identifies as being there, and he's accepted as being part of that. He's part of that group. He is absolutely part of a high-risk group, right? Similarly, if, let's say you live in the downtown east side, and you associate with people in the downtown east side, you have transient housing, and occasionally you partake in the, somewhat illicit substance or whatever, well, you're in a high-risk category. Because bad things happen in that neighborhood, and you meet the screening criteria. Whether or not you're actually part of that lifestyle is irrespective to the fact that you're there. And so, if you live on a ranch, you're going to know how to ride a horse. If you live down on the downtown east side, you're going to know stuff that you don't learn in West Vancouver. And when you are attached to those various groups, it's not that you will necessarily be affected in the same way as people that engage in really risky stuff, and that's not what I'm saying. It's just that you're more likely to get so on you. And it's proximity. Lifestyle and association to groups is a proximal factor, and the closer you are to it, the more likely you are to be affected by it. And if your group is particularly affected by stats like, men and women get breast cancer. Women are more likely to get breast cancer, right? Or at least to get diagnosed with it. Would you be at higher risk? I don't know. But probably assumed to be more higher risk than I am. This is a big list. But when I think about, and I made this list, when I think about all the people that I've worked with over the last 20 years and all the groups that I've worked with, these are the groups that I know absolutely are at higher risk of homelessness, transiency, drug addiction, crimes against person, general health issues, poverty-associated maladies of every sort, high-risk activities, everything like that. I mean, if it's a thing that'll get on the news, these groups, they're going to be there. Seniors, youth, homeless people, the mentally ill, particularly people who have undiagnosed mental illness, because if you don't know what you're working with, you can't work with it. The physically and developmentally delayed, although they've got some really great services to help them, they've got far more than other areas, but they're still at risk of victimization, probably more than I would like them to be. Alcoholics, addicts, for obvious reasons. Women, but not as much anymore. There's been progress in that area. There's been great work. If you go to 211, you are going to see that there's like 8,000 different services in Vancouver. 6,000 are for co-ed purposes. 2,000 are for women, period, just women. And there's like 200 for men, solely for men, which is why men are also in a high-risk category, because a lot of the services that are available to men, you have to be in a really bad position, or you have to pay for them to get them. And so the screening criteria to get into those programs, it's actually kind of funny, but as far as I understand it, to get into a program to help you with concerns about domestic violence, one of the best ways to get into that program is to be a woman. So screening criteria is really making it so that men have to be in a bad position before they get there. Aboriginal people, First Nations, Inuit, Métis, it's a big thing. Immigrants, for obvious reasons. It's language issues, access to services, ability to get hired, racism, educational difficulties, having to stop being a doctor in your community and push a broom here. Like, it's just, there's a lot of systemic reasons why immigrants are in a position of disadvantage. The LGBTQ community, for reasons that I still can't fathom, are, I talked about this with a friend of mine, CD, the other day, and there's been progression, but more and more, every once in a while you see them pull the veil back and it's still a whole bunch of lack of understanding and discrimination, and it's subtle, it's subversive, and it's just crap, but it makes it scary, it makes it hidden, and it makes it higher at risk for those reasons. People who don't want to come out of the closet have far more to lose, and that's one of the primary reasons that they're at risk. The newly poor, the working poor, try and buy a house in Vancouver and, have good food security. So, yeah, I ain't buying a house. Recently, and actually just divorced it anyway, because if you got to pay for your kid, I've heard more than one lawyer say that the formula is great, except for the person who needs to pay it, because it's at least somewhat occasionally disproportionate to actual income. And I'm hearing this from lawyers. Recently unemployed, big group. We're going to talk about that in just a second. And then illegal residents. And illegal residents, because they have no access to programs, no rights, if they don't exist in the black market, they don't exist. I'm going to talk about kind of my top 5 high-risk groups, the ones that I think are most common for us to deal with. There's actually a tie for 5. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about the black hole theory. And I'm borrowing this from a group in Toronto. They talked about people who enter into the life. So they come onto the streets for whatever reason. They estimated that they have about 3 weeks to get that person out of the life, or that person's going to be there for a really long time. And it really doesn't matter their background. Their experience has been 3 weeks or it's done. My experience with kids is it's a week. I don't think you have that long with a kid. Adults, it's 3 weeks. Kid, a week. And I'll explain it by the way they did. If you picture a black hole, if an object goes past a black hole, it's got momentum. But the black hole will suck it back, but it still has momentum, so it'll slingshot by it. But as it keeps getting drawn in, it loses momentum. And in the end, it just gets sucked in. And the law of inertia is pretty simple, that objects in motions tend to stay in motion, objects at rest tend to stay at rest. And kids have less momentum, and that's why I think it takes less time for them. Once you get used to being there, once you're not scared of it anymore, once you've had your dignity sucked out of you, you start to become institutionalized towards that, and the mindset changes. Once the mindset changes, you don't get out. And it is actually very easy to get out. It is hard to stay out. And I say that from my own experience. I got out like 7 times. But, staying out's the hard part. So what are, and by the way, there was a thing back there. Uncle Jer says, if a person is from a marginalized, what it should say is, if a person is from more than one marginalized group, or if they're from a marginalized group, they're probably at risk. If you think, wow, they got it bad, they're at risk. That's the litmus test. If you think, wow, I wouldn't want to be in their shoes, they're at risk. And that will affect your discussions because of the stress level they encounter, their ability to follow through on agreements, their ability to participate in a discussion, whether or not they got any sleep, whether or not they ate, any number of different reasons that would, limit their ability to participate. So that's just a throw out there. So, tied for number 5 on my list of high-risk populations, seniors. And for very obvious reasons. I was kind of laughing. My mom called me the other day. And she's not super old. She's like 65. Which I thought was really old when I was 20. But as I'm approaching middle 40s. I don't think it's that old anymore. She called me because I do her tech work. And so she told me that, she didn't have internet. She didn't know why, but she'd undone a whole bunch of work that I did because she got curious and she doesn't know what she's doing. And she wrote this Facebook thing about how, as I talked to her like a 6-year-old. And I don't think she meant it bad. It's just I explained things very simply so that she can understand them. And one of the things I did say is, do you remember those times when I was a kid and you told me not to touch it, but I touched it anyway, and when I touched it, it went bad, so you told me just not to touch it? Don't touch it. And so, as cute as that story is, what it really indicates when it's a bad way is that seniors are typically seen as not having a voice because what voice do they have? They're irrelevant. They don't have current knowledge. They don't have. They're great for a history lesson, but they're not up on today's things. They're not hip to, what everybody's talking about. They're not part of this current thing. They're not part of the workforce. They are not part of that decision-making thing. One of the biggest knocks against Bernie Sanders, who I think is brilliant, is the fact that he's 74 years old. So what does he know about being 20 today? Relevance, or the perception of a lack thereof, takes away your voice when it really, really shouldn't. Fixed income stuff. When you have a fixed income, and for seniors that are not, or retirees, not just seniors, but retirees, if you can do whatever you want to do because you got enough money that you can do that, you have a voice. If you don't, you become far more dependent. And let's face it, people are living longer, right? Money runs out. We're not talking about increasing, Canada pension. We're talking about the news stories these days that project that people do not have enough saved up. And when they get to retirement age, they're screwed. And that's what we're projecting. And so in that sense, we're going to come back to more of a collectivist ideal where family members and extended family are participating in the care and feeding of the people who care and feed for them. But that also takes away your power. And it makes it so that you don't have as much autonomy. And that's really unfortunate, but I find it to be very much that way. Seniors are often the targets of any number of different bad things, whether it be financial scams, rip-offs, home invasions, price gouging, they're an easy target. They just are. And not all. I mean, I remember the story of the former World War II soldier in Toronto who beat the crap out of a home invader. But we don't hear those stories as much as we'd like. We hear that people had stuff taken away, and unfortunately, in those cases, well, I know if it's my mom, she's not going to want to tell me because she's not going to want to hear me say, well, how did you do that, in the same way that I would to my kid. Pride, not wanting to be perceived as less. Sometimes that silence, that secret and shadow, the honor, not wanting to have that sort of shame, that gets in the way of it. But it makes them targets. And then, in the end, I think sometimes when it really just comes down to it, we kind of look at comparison and we think that, as much as our parents or grandparents or those elders in our community have wisdom, I know that even in my community where elders have been typically quite respected, even old people, not just elders, the younger people in my community today are taking more advice from hip-hop than they are from their elders. And that respect that was just there inherently is no longer there. I don't know if that's good or bad. I just know it's not there. As a result of all these and many other factors, and we could probably go around the table and you could give me your own opinions And if you're young, you can say what you see, and if you're older, you can say what you've experienced yourself. But the truth is that this group is coming to the table, and that's why they're here. They're coming to the table because we're doing elder law, wills, estates, various things, and they're likely to get steamrolled in a discussion with an angry young man. And if we're not careful, it's going to happen. And that's our job, is to make sure that we balance those power differences. So, one of the things that we do is we make sure that they have a full understanding of what's being discussed, that they can make an informed decision, that they're not just sold something, that they're not just told what to do, that they're actually commenting on what they want, and that voice is being heard. And because sometimes, and I've experienced this in some situations I've dealt with, Jimmy's not going to listen to Grandpa, but Jimmy, if I say Grandpa's talking right, Jimmy might listen to me. And it's not advocating, it's saying, it's that confirmation that, no, I heard this sounds right. And that's harder to buck up against from a bad negotiating position. You don't want to lose your neutrality, but you want to make sure that people can't just talk crap in your mediations. And the other thing is that if they don't have supports, make sure that they're aware of the various community supports. The nice thing about this group is there are a lot of agencies, no matter where you are, where people will make sure that they've got advocacy and support. And so that's a great thing. And that's not becoming the advocate yourself. That's just making sure, in the same way that we make sure that people are aware of their right to counsel, that they're also aware of their right to advocacy. Time for seniors. Time for fifth youth. And for the same reasons, right? They're seen as either having poor judgment or no judgment because I got shirts older than you, right? How possibly could you decide what you want to do? Because what, you're 14? What do you know? I think all of us in this room, and if you can't, you had a great life. But I remember very clearly people sitting in a room with me, talking about me, with me in the room without asking me what I thought. I remember people talking at me. I remember being told what to do. I rarely remember being engaged in a discussion or considered to have a brain, even though everybody talked about how smart I was. So in the same way that seniors are kind of improperly dismissed, youth are often improperly dismissed as well. Here's the other thing. Righteous anger. I love righteous anger. I think righteous anger is great. It means that you haven't given up. It means that you have an opinion. It means that you know it was wrong and you're not happy about it and you want to do something about it. And how often do we write off righteous anger from the youth as teen angst? Oh, Becky's just pissed off that her boyfriend dumped her. Dude! Tell me. And it's, everywhere you go, and can I get an amen from the young people? Ages, practices, and policies. You can't get a job till this. You can't do that. You're not old enough. You can't do this. You're not capable. I mean, how many has experienced that in the last 10 years? Yeah. And even as young lawyers, does everybody remember that? You go through all that training, and then what? You can get coffee for people? Ageism is alive and well in Canada. And so, what do we do? It's the same. We make sure that they have a voice. We make sure that they're engaged. We make sure that they know what they're talking about. If I think that you know what you're talking about, I don't care how old you are, I'm going to say it. They know what they're talking about. Why are we discussing this? And if they won't hear me, go get an advocate. And there are plenty. So go get them. And then come back to the table, and we'll take a break until you do, and then they can say it so that you can have a fair discussion. And if they won't take your word, they'll take somebody else's. And kind of my bottom line, as Uncle Jer says, if it sucked for you, it's going to suck for them. If we look at the constant piece of the human existence as being certain things, with the variables being how our socioeconomic or gender or sexual orientation or all of these things change that. There is a consistent and constant experience in life. And it's the cultural norm for where we live. And for seniors and youth, the constant in these two is that you get disregarded. And when they come to our table, we need to make sure they're really there. And that everybody else knows they're there. And that's the position that I take. For the mentally ill, and this has a number of different philosophical things to it. There have been ongoing debates as to whether or not people should be forced to medicate, whether or not people should be forced to be committed or this or that. All I know is that whether we're talking about family planning, transition planning, succession planning, divorce, business, issues of competency are driving forces. And when somebody's got the label of being mentally ill, whether it be depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, manic depressive, borderline, any of your number of different things, well, we kind of treat them like, they're second class. We treat their, we talk to their disability. We talk to their illness. We talk to their disorder. There are a number of different things that we need to understand about this, but the primary one being that I have somebody very close to me who has anxiety and who is being treated for anxiety. It's not a 24/7, 365 thing. They will have moments where I know it's affecting them. Every other moment, if I'm talking to the anxiety, I'm an idiot. That's just the way it is. So why they're at risk? They're perceived as being incompetent whether or not they're in the throes of their disorder or not. They're perceived as volatile and otherwise unable to make rational decisions. So you might as well consider it the same way that people would talk to a 2-year-old. Right? Many individuals suffering with undiagnosed, misdiagnosed conditions and are self-medicating in ways that are unhealthy and dangerous. So I knew a kid who had Tourette's and medicated with heroin. If you know that you're just not normal, you're going to do something to make you feel normal. People will get their needs met. They will do what works. And they will, if they don't have options for them, they'll make their own. And that's not relegated to street kids. How many people with depression are medicated with booze? How many people with, anxiety are medicated with, way too much in the way of benzodiazepines? It's everybody here probably knows somebody who, has self-medicated in one way or another, and whether it was for a situational malady like people who drink too much after a divorce, or, freaked out during exams and so, smoked way too many bowls from the bong. It's a fairly normal occurrence. Some mental health issues are situational and some are not. If they're undiagnosed, we don't know what we're working with, but they will affect people at the table. And they affect them in life, which usually gets them to the table. But more often than not, one of the reasons that we talked about is they're at risk because they hide it. If it's in secrets and shadows, we can't work with it, we can't deal with it effectively, which means generally we deal with it inappropriately and ineffectively, and the result of that is that all of these various issues pile up for them. And that's why they end up at our tables. So, does the mediation process get them properly medicated? No. Not in the least. But maybe it helps start the discussion that takes away the stigma. Maybe it starts the process where we can normalize it and make it understood that they're not bad people, that they're not, damaged, disrupted, all of these things. Maybe it's just they got something and it's real and we can deal with it and it's okay and let's just talk about it. And maybe that gets them through. So we, as a matter of practice strategies, what we do is we structure mediation in ways that accommodate their needs and promote success. If you have somebody who has anxiety disorder, and they smoke, for God's sakes, let them take smoke breaks. It's a simple thing. They cannot, if you got a kid with FASD, if you ever do child protection, you'll run into this. If you are fortunate enough to get a kid with FASD to the table, don't start at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It takes a lot of energy to be cool. Like, it really does. And it's because how their brain's wired, it takes a lot of energy to focus and to manage that volatility. So when they wake up and take their medical interventions, whatever that might be, and it's not always right, but it's what they got, an hour after that, usually, is when they're best focused. And it's targeted that way so that they can go to school. If you start at 1 o'clock, the meds are already wearing off. And they're not going to be able to sit still, and they're not going to focus, and they're going to want to be compliant, but they won't be able to be. And then you just set them up for failure because you structured it for 1 o'clock. Know what you're working with so that you can work with them. Make it more possible for them to be engaged, and they'll be more engaged. And whether this is youth, adults, if they've got things that make them more effective, talk to them about what their strategies are and find the ways to incorporate that within your work. Make sure they have the ability to have supports, attend, and participate. If you're an introvert with an anxiety disorder, you are not going to talk at a mediation. You're just not. But there are advocates that will go with you and they'll make sure that you talk. And in child protection, I got to tell you, not every lawyer spends a whole lot of time with their clients. So don't trust that the lawyer's going to advocate for them. You know, family disputes are kind of the same way. You know, advocates will know more than the lawyers will. They just will. So help them and work with them. And then I guess the last thing is, it must really suck to be spoken to as though you're damaged. You know, and to have every single conversation be about your limitations. So don't talk to them like that. Talk to the person, you know. If they're coherent, they'll talk back. That'll be great. You can discuss tennis. I like tennis. 3, LGBTQ. So, for a number of reasons, and way too many to list, and it's getting better, but it's not there. And it's, I guess the one thing that I would say is that it's still different. And, I mean, we've been dealing with this question for so long that it has become more of the social norm. But Westboro Baptist, you know, various religious groups, various political groups, you know, various, you know, my freedom, my choice, you know. I mean, who was that chick down in the States, the county committee? I mean, Jesus Christ. Come on. But we talked about this a little bit, and the fact is that if a person's in the closet, they're more likely to be at risk because they're forced to engage in their life in such a way where there's a Batman situation. You know, so you got Bruce Wayne and then you got Batman, and they're both the same person, but nobody knows Batman is Bruce Wayne. And Bruce Wayne is fine, Batman gets shot at. That's the way it is. Whenever you've got a situation of duality, there's potential for risk. And really, it's not just from unhealthy practices, but in terms of more open to extortion, more open to coercion, more open to any sort of leverage against. And at our tables, that's what's important. I don't care what people do. I care that if we're in a discussion and Bob's talking and then Jim says, "Oh, really? Well, how about da-da-da-da-da," and then Bob backs down. There is an unhealthy power imbalance based on secrets and shadows. And it comes from the fact that client A knows that client B has a secret and they're playing on it. Maybe it matters and maybe it doesn't. Maybe we can negotiate it, maybe we can't. But I know that it's going to blow up my discussion. And I don't want that. So I want to be aware of that. And I got to tell you, 99% of the time it doesn't matter. I hardly ever see that. But it's possible. And that's why we put it there. We also have to understand that, there's, because of the climate and how it's been, and particularly in the older generation, there's been such abuse and discrimination that people are looking for a fight as soon as they sit at the table. And suddenly normal conflicts or discussions suddenly have this overtone of attached, motive or this or that when it's not there, but they've been through enough fights where they're anticipating it. They're bracing for impact before they get there. And I don't want to change that. I just want to manage it. I want to be cognizant of it so I can help them through it in the same way that we would with somebody with PTSD. I just want to help them. If they're in a fight or flight response, they're not thinking. If they're in a fight or flight response, they can't process the way to get out safely. They're just going to get out. I don't want that. And I don't want a bigger fight than I need. One of the big things is actually just the cultural norms. Because it is still different. It's not everybody's thing. And so I'm going to out my grandma, right? But not in the way that you think. My grandma was a lovely woman, German woman, beautiful woman, still referred to Tiger Woods as that nice colored golfer. Right? And there are people whose terminology or cultural practice or way they've lived all their life, even if they're trying to be appropriate and correct, still is going to come off with some really backwoods terms. And that can make things tense. So we got to watch for that. And those are feathers that we can smooth pretty quickly, I hope. I guess the last point that I'd make of the very many that are out there, this isn't like women's issues. There's been a lot of work on women's issues, decades, century of work on women's issues. This is still young. There's still a hell of a lot of discrimination. Still, and it's open and rampant. And the problem I think we have at this point is that the language is, but the attitudes are still there. The perceptions are still there. People still think they're going to hell. And that's just a horrible thing. And it's a horrible thing we'll deal with. So, what do we do as a practice? So, we ensure that we treat them the same way we treat everybody else. They're people. We don't key in on it. If it becomes an issue, well, we deal with it. But as far as I know, you're just Bill. That's okay. I don't really care. We be careful with gender-specific language. We make sure that we know that how we're addressing somebody is respectful. And when we don't know, we ask. Right? If we want to make sure that we're respectful, if there's any sort of question, we just make sure that we're being conscious of their needs. And sometimes you need to know they're not going to say anything. They're just going to sit there and stew. So if you're not watching their eyes and their body and making sure that they're not bristling every time you say she, well, be aware. It's a thing these days. It might have been a thing always, but it's really a thing these days. And finally, and this is the funny one, right? Don't overcompensate. Don't talk. It's that old joke of, oh hey, I got a gay cousin in Chicago. Do you know him? Jim. Oh yeah, gay Jim from Chicago. Yeah. Right. It's that old joke, but it's suddenly. And man, I get this as an Aboriginal person. Everybody wants to tell me about their Aboriginal cousins. I don't care. And in the gay community, and I've been fairly attached to the gay community throughout my life. It's people who overcompensate just make it kind of icky. It just gets uncomfortable. So just you be you and they be them, and do the business at hand, and because that's what we do for everybody else. So let's do it for them. Aboriginal. I'm going to be really quick on this one because this should be a no-brainer. If you ever wonder why this is a high-risk group, just go to any history book about Canada and look at the 500 years of systematic oppression. Look at the various government policies and residential school things and all of that stuff. Think about the Trail of Tears. Think about the smallpox blankets. Think about residential school. I got to tell you, it was real. My grandpa went to residential school. His parents received a letter when he was 8 years old telling them that it was their privilege for them to send their child from Penticton to Kamloops by train, and maybe you'll see him at Christmas. It was real. It was recent. This is not 2,000 years ago. It's still an open wound. It is not done yet. A lot of good work being done. Really appreciated the apology from Stephen Harper. Glad that the commissions are done. Glad we're finally getting one on murder missing out. Dude, seriously, as a First Nations person, I got to tell you, I wish this wasn't an issue. I wish that we were past. We're not past this. It's just the way it is. People are still racist. I left Regina. I had a pretty good gig in Regina. I could not raise my children in Regina because it's cowboys and Indians there, and you're either a cowboy or you're an Indian. And you pick sides. That wasn't that long ago. So there's really good reasons. The other part that makes it higher risk is that there's not a real commonality. There are like 613 different First Nations across Canada. There are 2 distinct Inuit groups and 3 different Métis groups, and everybody's fighting for money and rights and services and on reserve and off reserve and are you status and blood quantum and you shouldn't be status and my daughter isn't, but she really should be, and I don't know why the government screwed us, but it was because of a misogynistic policy that was put forth. Dude, this is what I live with every day. We're high risk for a reason. We argue with ourselves. We argue with the government. When the Indian agent came onto my reserve, seriously, families that had lived together, eternally, were saying, well, that family's not Indian. Dude, this is my reserve. Come on. That was 1928. It's not much different now. Here's another thing. The Métis got hosed. First Nations were not treated well. My grandfather was disenfranchised in 1943 so that he could fight Hitler, right? So he wasn't an Indian after that, right? Greatest story. Day of his discharge in Vancouver, just not far from here. On his way to get discharged, stops in a bar, has a beer, hailed the hero. He was with the 1st Special Service Force. He was the predecessor to the Green Berets. He did some stuff. He was something. When he was discharged, got into his civilian clothes, was not allowed in the same bar. An hour later. That's bad. The Métis got it worse. If you think that's bad, imagine not being able to be anything. Yet your leader hanged, and you can't come up with a clear definition of what Métis is. And that negates that totally diminishes your negotiating position because you're not one group. They got hosed. They're still getting hosed. Even once First Nations are taken care of. Look, they would have got none of it. That wasn't that long ago. The Métis still don't have nothing. And actually, Julie, I had a conversation with Sharon. It's seriously, it's a thing. And of whatever you think, it's just not over. I guarantee. I was talking to when I was in Birmingham, Alabama. I was talking to a black guy, and I was explaining to him that being Indian in Canada is like being black in the States. And he says, "What?" And I said, well, yeah. Let me ask you the question. If a cop pulls you over, do you sit there with your hands on the steering wheel, wondering why you got pulled over, thinking of all the different reasons and wondering if you're guilty, even though you didn't do nothing? I totally do that. Yeah, we do too. If a social worker comes to your house, do you think they're going to take your kids even though you're a good parent? Yeah, I totally do. Do people think that your people are doctors? Nope. Well, they don't for us either. It's changing, but it ain't done. We ain't there. That's why we're high risk. All right? So again, treat them like everybody else. You have to make sure that participation at the table, even from non-parties, is not tokenistic. If you're in an Aboriginal thing and you've got an elder and all they're doing is sitting there and you don't engage with them and treat them with some respect, token. They can't just be there. They're engaged or they're not there. Either one is acceptable, period. And again, seriously, don't overcompensate. You know, it's the running joke is that every white person has a grandmother who was an Indian princess. You know, really. I mean, there's just a whole difference with that. I mean, we didn't have kingdoms. If you're gonna be a princess, you gotta come from a king. We didn't have those, right? My grandfather said that. My dad was white. His dad told me how his grandmother was an Indian princess. Wow, that was weird. I heard the joke before he said it. I just cringed. Thanks, Grandpa. This is what I think the highest risk group is. Of all the groups I've worked with, when I talk to my friends who work in the field, when I talk to everybody I know about this is the group that I think is highest risk. And it's the newly poor. If you come from poverty, you know what to do. You were raised in it, you grew up in it, you're going to have a resiliency as a result of that. When you lose everything and you're not used to that, that's damning. And it causes so many things in terms of stress that your faculties leave you. So your ability to engage in a discussion, much less. Your ability to plan the future, much less. And so planning strategies, any of that stuff that we would deal in any venue. There's a reason stockbrokers jumped out the window. Losing everything when you've never lost anything, that's tough. That's a kick. Being one of those people, when you used to laugh at those people, that's hard to do. And I've got real empathy for that. I really do. I feel bad for these guys. I grew up poor. I know I'm cool with margarine and fake cheese. I love spray cheese, by the way. These guys don't know what to do. I've seen some. I ran a street mission. Newly poor. Hard. They don't have natural supports. And they don't have community supports. Anybody see Trading Places, Dan Aykroyd? Remember that scene where he goes to the country club asking for help and all his friends just shut him? Because now he's dirty and they don't want to be like him and he's a reminder of all the things that they could lose. That was cruel, and that happens all the time. They don't have natural supports. And more than that, generally speaking, they're not coming from an area where community supports exist. Right? If you want services for the poor, you have to go to impoverished neighborhoods. And if you're coming from South Surrey, they don't exist there. So you got to go to Wally. And Wally's a different world. Like it's a totally different gig. If you're from Marpole and you hang out down at the Brandees on Hastings, it's a different world. And you stick out like a sore thumb, you look like a tourist, and you look scared, which sets you up for victimization on any number of levels. These guys are the most likely to give up. Of all the people I've seen, they're just done. They try a little bit, but these are the guys who fall into a bottle and never get out. It just happens. They don't know what to do, and so they just get lost and stay lost. And no matter how it happened, divorce, mental health, no fault of their own, bad stock deal, Bernie Madoff. There's a lot of good reasons to lose everything that have nothing to do with you, but if you don't have the support to get through, you're just hosed. And yeah, they just experience far more stress. They're drowning. It's really painful to watch. That's why they're high risk. They're victims. They look like victims. They act like victims. They got a target on their head, and bad things will happen to them. And at our tables, if we can recognize that and help structure it so that they're at a more equal position and can act in a more equal position, whether it be in child protection or family or this or that, there's a way to make it possible for them to move through with dignity and respect, and hopefully that gets them on a better track. And then it's not all tragedy. So again, make sure they're supported through the discussion. Show as much empathy as you can. I don't say that with any other group. I don't want you to feed the victim status, but empathy is a big thing for these guys. And they need it. It helps. But most importantly, if you know that they're not thinking because they're so focused on all the stuff that's going on for them, ask good questions. Be interested. You can't tell them what to do, but you can help them think. And you can do that by asking good questions and keeping them engaged. Right? I really do believe that this is the highest risk group. So, above all else, remember that belonging to a high-risk group doesn't automatically mean that you have bad things happening to you. Just because you're Indian doesn't mean life's bad. But when somebody's in these groups, you have to rule out. Because there might be stuff in the background that affects the discussion or the outcome of the planning. And if the value of the agreement is the individual's ability to carry it through, then we have to make sure that we're considering the factors that are going to affect the agreement long term. That is my belief. Second, the more high-risk populations you belong to, the greater the likelihood that there are factors that you as the mediator need to consider. It's not like every time there's smoke, there's fire. But if you see enough smoke, start looking for fire. Finally, and do it without, if people don't want to tell you, they don't want to tell you, but help them. Help them not have to deal with what they're dealing with in the discussion with all the stuff going on in the background. It helps them be present. These are protected conversations for a reason. And finally, be careful that you don't just see the negative within these groups. We screen for the negative for a reason, but seeing the beauty is equally as important. I gotta tell you, when I was on the street, I was never without a cigarette. My street family was far more supportive than my birth family ever was. There's a lot of dysfunction and chaos, but there's also a lot of beauty. And if you take the time to find out about it and find out about the entirety of a person's life from the group they are, it's a wonderful opportunity to grow. The immigrant experience, I don't know that I would want to experience it personally, but I think that there's a lot of beauty to it as well. So, questions? Oh, I was just kidding. Hold on. There we go.
Go back to that question.
Questions? Anyone? You?
With the high stress of needing to move up, of course. Jim, if you don't mind.
Just questions about strategy.
Okay.
So when you have a person that's obviously distressed,
Yeah.
at what point do you back off from doing the mediation and do you engage with the person separately to arrive at a normalcy, if you want? Or what is your judgment? What kind of judgment do you use at that point?
I think it's all situationally dependent, so
Yeah.
it depends on the individual. some people aren't going to want to focus on the background stuff at all, even if it's affecting them, and you can't make them consider it. But if I know that it's getting in the way, ideally I would have found it in the orientations and set up that normalcy.
So that wasn't readily visible from your presentation that you had time before.
You don't always have time before. Like I say, ideally, when I do child protection mediation, I've got a mediation tomorrow. I've been trying to get a hold of people for a week and a half. I've talked to the social worker. I haven't talked to the clients. I know exactly what's going on in their life, and I know that there's background stuff, but I'm going to have 10 minutes with them tomorrow. And so it's in that situation, what I would ideally have is I'd go to McDonald's and grab a coffee and sit down with them and build that rapport. But when you don't have it, it's kind of that meatball surgery aspect where you just kind of have to have that quick connection, and sometimes that's easier than others. And I know in child protection, sometimes it's easier based on just focusing on the business of the day. But if I get into tomorrow, and all of a sudden background stuff's coming up, as soon as we get through whatever point we can, and there's a natural break, I'm going to take time. I'm going to sit down and talk to them. I'm going to talk them down, and I'm going to get them back to the conversation. I'm going to refocus them.
You said do no harm.
Yeah.
So in that, from that point of view, do you have strategy for saying, you know what, there's something I don't know about you? Right? Anyway, that's my
yeah, and it's in terms of.
Sorry, Jeremy, I just got a note that they weren't hearing your question even so. So if you could just repeat it as you started, that's probably enough for this one.
Okay, so Jim's asking about how do we best prepare or best engage with people in such a way where if background noise presents itself, that we can deal with those issues, because if they're affecting the conversation at the table, we need to be able to bring it back.
Well, the thing was do no harm.
Yeah.
And the do no harm at times shows up during the discussion. You go, oh, wait a minute, something.
Yeah.
And
So I guess what you're talking about are those landmine moments.
yeah.
Okay, so a landmine moment is a situation where you couldn't see something coming up, and all of a sudden you've triggered something, and now you've got background stuff happening because you've offended or hurt or touched a sore spot. I say sorry. I pull them aside and I say sorry, and I let the whole table know that I'm sorry. But that's when I generally caucus, and I let them know that I didn't mean to do it. And that's a genuine thing. And I think that when you genuinely are caring about the fact that a person's in distress,
Yeah.
if they know that you didn't mean to do it because you couldn't have known, then and I think that's not just child protection. I think that's anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that's in any venue. If you step on a landmine, it's a mea culpa time. You know, that's what I think.
Thanks.
So I'm just watching time, Jeremy, and wondering where you want to go and where other people want to go, since we're towards the end of our time, and I know we started late, but I want to touch base with people and not just assume and trap them.
Absolutely.
So what are your thoughts? Where are you going?
The next part is pretty quick, and some of it we already covered. We're going to talk about, and hard to serve is easier to explain. There's less involved to it because it's a way more easy topic. It's not going to take as long. How far are we along now? Because I was noticing it was.
Well, we're 6:05.
Okay.
So
That's
we've
a
just
lot.
yeah.
That's a lot.
Did you want me to be holding up time? Because I thought you were monitoring it, but I will.
Well, I'm not monitoring it at all.
All right, I'll.
There's a lot. I mean,
We started about 15 minutes late.
Okay.
Do we want to go to 6:15? Does that give you enough time to do anything?
I can do it. Okay.
It's all about challenge,
Ask a
Jeremy.
mediator, they can do it.
Yeah.
I can do it.
Yes, we can.
All right, so I'm gonna give you the Coles notes on hard to serve, and after when we shut down, if you've got any questions, first of all, here's what I'm prepared to do. I am prepared to send you my PowerPoint. I am prepared to talk to you. I'm prepared to do whatever you need to do to get more information. I'm way good with that.
Okay, and I can hand out, with your PowerPoint, I can probably give some contact information,
Yeah, absolutely.
Twitter handle, all that
I
kind of
got
stuff.
cards.
Okay.
when we're talking about hard to serve clients, there's an old saying in youth work: the people who need us the most make it the most difficult for us to serve them. And there's like 3 different reasons why people become hard to serve. Either A, for whatever reason, they make it difficult for us. So non-compliance, not following rules, not following up, not showing up, being generally disruptive, being angry, aggressive, any of that stuff. Anything that gets you red carded, that's what I'm talking about. The second part is when there's nothing we can do. If that perfect solution scenario, support, service isn't there. If you're in a rural region and you have absolutely no access to service, that's a hard to serve client, because it's not that you don't want to, and it's not that you wouldn't, it's that you can't. That's a problem, right? And the third part is clients you don't like. If you don't like somebody, or for whatever reason, there are other reasons that you are personally involved, anything that brings you out of neutral, that's a different thing entirely. And those are hard to serve as well. Because if our job is to be the steady neutral and indifferent compassionately, then, well, they're hard to serve. If we're for or against somebody, if we're rooting for an outcome, if we're giving hints, if we're playing for one side, all of that stuff is bad. Don't do that. One of the notes that I put in is that, particularly with FASD clients, if the adaptive reasoning skills are done, which means they can't associate cause and effect, they might really be trying to comply and just not getting it. And if you penalize that, you're just going to drive them deeper down. So watch for that. These are my examples of hard to serve clients. And I'm going to go through them fairly quickly, but you've got your own list. So, drunks and addicts. People who are systemized or entitled. People who've been in the system so long that suddenly they believe that you should just do this for me. That's hard to serve. Clients with undiagnosed mental illness because you don't know what you're working with. The physically or developmentally delayed because there are barriers that just pop up for them that we typically do not accommodate for. Right? Just because that's it. I mean, I got a home-based office. There's no wheelchair ramp at my place. Right? I have to make accommodations and I can't. It's tough. Clients that we have mistreated. Yes, you will mistreat clients. They are hard to serve. Right? You did that. Clients who've been mistreated by other people. Right? If you're fixing somebody else's work, that's tough. Right? Clients we're attracted to. It'll happen. That sucks. I don't envy you. Clients who are attracted to us, that is equally uncomfortable. Rich people, pedophiles and abusers, racists, former service providers, those are my favorites, right? Former social workers, love them. Oh yeah, yeah, no, I'm telling you, see, Wendy is like nodding in a way.
Whereas I was thinking lawyers acting on their own behalf.
Oh yeah. They're awesome. Radicals. So any of your backwoods Montana militia, they're fun. They're a good time. Polygamous communities, very, very fun. But here's people that we don't normally consider, and that's people that we like, because that's tough. People that we dislike. There are people who are just going to rub you the wrong way, and there are people that you are just going to enjoy. Neither one of those are good in conflict situations. You know, it brings you out of neutral. When you're biased, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It just means that you are either inclined towards or against something. And it means that you've gone from being objective to subjective. You have an interest. And if your interest is anything other than the conversation, you're out of your depth. So, tips for working with hard serve. First, manage your emotions. Some days you're working from the neck up, and some days you're working from the neck down. And when we're at mediation, we need to listen and think, but we don't need to work with our heart. I tell people that their two best friends are the brain and their heart. They need to be used at the same time, but typically we need to turn off the little feely bit. We need to focus on the discussion. Second, recognize your triggers and limitations. If you were sexually abused as a child, working with pedophiles is going to be tough for you. If you're not watching your game the entire time, it's going to be rough for you, and you're going to start influencing the outcome. You need to watch. Know when to hand off the ball. You need to understand when you are not neutral anymore and refer to somebody else. The nice thing about this is that people will think that you're being nice. They think that they'll be thinking that you're giving them business. You're just trying to make it so that you're doing a good job. Both are great outcomes. Don't take the bait, right? So it's people who are hard to serve typically lash out, right? It's a temper tantrum. It's a 2-year-old. Don't engage with it. Don't take the bait. Once you start arguing, you've lost. It's just not good. Don't do it. Speak so that you're understood. Try it as best you can. Learn the language of the people that you're with. So, as much as I'm not going to learn Urdu or Farsi anytime soon, I do speak lawyer, and I do speak social worker, and I do speak street kid. And so oftentimes in my mediation, I act as a translator so that people know what they're talking about. And in doing that, you ease the conversation. And you'll find that the more people know what's going on, the less stressed out they are, and the easier they are to serve. A small note, when my first daughter was born, it was a long delivery. And I would watch the heart monitor, and one time it was like 140, and another time it was 160, and another time it was 120. And I asked each of the nurses at these times, is this normal? And they said yes. I just didn't understand how that would be. And I was freaking out because as much as it was normal for them, I had no idea what was going on. Mediation is normal for us. But if you're in these groups or you're hard to serve, meeting me is a bad day for you. If you need a lawyer, if you're with a social worker, if you need a mediator, your life sucks. And so recognize that, honor that, show some respect, and give them the deference of recognizing that and, being with them. Speak so that you're understood. Never assume why somebody's hard to serve. You don't know why they're hard to serve, you just know that they're hard to serve. If you need to make accommodations, make accommodations. If you can find out why things are the way they are, that's great. If they don't want to tell you, then you just work with what you've got. More importantly, actually listen. Biggest problem that I see with people coming out is the kids with the laptops taking notes. God, I hate those people. I'm not even kidding. There is a natural physical barrier between you and the client. There's a big difference between collecting data and listening. I understand that collecting information is important to your thing and that you got notes and you got all this. Great. And man, if you got a bad memory, you're going to have to do something. But I tell you, there is nothing more intimidating than watching somebody write down all the stuff that you say. Particularly when you've been told that notes are bad because they can be subpoenaed. Right? No. If you got to take notes, get permission. Figure out how to listen. Really listen. It's like it's like talking to your mom when she's watching TV and she's going, yeah, okay, yeah. Are you really listening? Yeah, totally listening. Actually listen. Finally, whenever possible, accommodate. One of the things that I like to say to people is that an hour meeting for me is sometimes a full day journey for somebody else. You need to recognize that. If you're working with these groups, you got to try and make it easy. You're not always going to be able to, but you do the best you can. Accommodate whenever possible. I mean, there's a reason we do it. The less angry a person is when they get to your door, the less angry a person is when they leave your door, the more likely you're going to be in a conversation that doesn't blow up. Never promise what you can't perform. Very simple. We know fakes. We know people that are just putting it on. If you tell me what I want to hear, that's not the same as telling me the truth. If you say it's going to happen, it has to happen. If you don't, you're just like everybody else. And that will crush rapport. And finally, Be authentically you. Absolutely, be you. Nobody cares who you are, right? They don't need you. You know, there's some myths that are at the end of this, but just be you. Because you're awesome. Somebody likes you. Everybody, if they get to know you, probably thinks that you're great. So let your clients get to know you. You know, professional biography and all that stuff, but don't put up a wall. Be you. You don't have to be somebody else. You don't have to be cool. You don't have to have a gay friend. You don't have to have an Indian cousin. You know. Don't wear a dream catcher if you don't. So, a couple last things. Some myths. You're more effective if you come from the group you're working with. That is totally false. You can be an idiot and still come from that group, right? People want to work with good people. They don't care where you're from. Anyone can work with anyone else with the right training. That is also false. There are just some groups that you're not going to be able to work with. Accept that. Move on. Work with who you can work with. Expand as much as you can, but stay with what you're good at. You'll damage less people and have a better career. No, I just went straight to 4. Huh.
That
People-
speeds it up.
Yeah. People who are good at working with these groups are always equal to the task. No. You can be really good at what you do and working with certain groups, and you're going to have bad days, bad sessions, bad mediations. I mean, I've had some dogs, and you just shake it off and move forward. And here's the one I want to talk to you about, though. Everybody thinks that pedophiles are the hardest group to work with, but they're not. This is a purely subjective measure. The hardest group for you to work with is whoever is hardest for you to work with. The ones that push your buttons, the ones that draw you from neutral, the ones that you care about. That's who is hardest for you. And that's what you really have to watch for. Right? So as I leave you today, just remember a couple things. People didn't want you to do anything. They wouldn't open their mouth if they're talking to you. They want you to do something. Don't fall for the knockout punch. If you're working with these groups, particularly street types, they will tell you the worst thing that you've ever heard, and they will do that first off to see how you react. What I want you to do is not react, and remember that whatever you think of what they just said, it was safe for them to tell you that. There is stuff that is unsafe. They didn't tell you that. That's coming next. That's if you pass the test. And finally, and this is the most important thing. I said the one important thing, this is the most important thing. The operative word is service. You work for these guys. Everybody thinks the service industry is like Burger King and stuff like that. And it's not. The service industry is any industry that provides a service. And so these groups often encounter people who think that they're doing them a favor. And really, you're just doing your job. And I love you. I think you're all great. I mean, I'm looking at you. You're wonderful. But the truth is, you're just doing your job. And do it well. And enjoy it, because you get to do stuff that other people can't do, and you're invited into people's lives. And it's a wonderful opportunity. And if you do it well, they're going to be really well served. And if you don't, you're going to screw them up and get paid well to do it. So you're in the service industry, and I thank you for that. Because not everybody can do what you do, but you do it. So God love you. Godspeed. 10 minutes. It didn't go that well, but actually...
Didn't really do 10 either, but whatever. All right. Well, I want to say thank you so much to Jereme. And I'm not going to take time. I talked about our previous speaker things quickly. You can check them out. But I'm looking around. We've got new faces. So the only thing I'm going to say is if you're interested in getting notice of other talks and things like that and being on our mailing list, just give me an email address on this, because and you don't get a ton of them. What you'll end up getting is an email about once a month, just a couple weeks ahead, to let you know what's coming up. Okay, so I will pass that around, but otherwise, Jereme, thank you. And you're sitting around for a few minutes while we collect everything up. Folks who are online, definitely send any messages on, and I will pass them on to Jereme. Thanks.
Thank you. Enjoy the muffins.
Thank you for